The scent of burning sage and cedar filled the ceremonial grounds, sharp and primal against the backdrop of approaching night. Wisps of smoke curled around ancient oak pillars, dancing in the gentle evening breeze that carried whispers of anticipation and judgment from the gathered pack. The full moon hung low and swollen in the twilight sky, its silver glow casting long shadows across faces both familiar and foreign. I could feel its pull in my blood, an ancestral tug that made my skin feel too tight, my senses too sharp. I shouldn't have been there. Not really. The mating ceremony happened once every 3 years, when the moon reached its perfect fullness on the summer solstice. It was reserved for the unmated she-wolves of strong bloodlines, those deemed worthy of continuing our pack's legacy. Those with something to offer. I had slipped in among them like a sparrow among hawks, hoping no one would notice the difference. "Stand straight, Eliza," my mother had whispered earlier, as she braided my pale blonde hair with trembling fingers. "Don't let them see your fear." She'd woven wildflowers between the strands, bluebells for humility, daisies for innocence. A mother's desperate attempt to make her daughter appear worthy of notice. Remember your grandmother's words. Even the smallest wolf has teeth. The carved wooden pendant my grandmother had left me hung heavy between my collarbones. I reached up to touch it, fingers tracing the worn spiral that symbolized transformation. She'd been the last Omega in our pack, a position both revered and pitied, the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the one who absorbed the pack's pain. When she died, the role had died with her, or so everyone thought. I was nothing like her. Where she had been strong in her gentleness, I was simply weak. Where she had chosen compassion, I merely lacked aggression. I was just Eliza, the girl who faded into backgrounds, the one whose shift came late and incomplete, the one they called half-wolf behind cupped hands. "Eliza Bennett," Elder Margaret called, her voice cutting through my thoughts. 50 pairs of eyes turned to me at once. I felt each gaze like a physical touch, some curious, some dismissive, some openly hostile. From the corner where the unattached males stood, I heard snickering. I recognized the sound without needing to look. Ryan and his friends, who had spent our childhood reminding me that I didn't belong. My legs trembled beneath the ceremonial white dress as I stepped forward into the circle of moonlight at the center of the gathering. The fabric, borrowed from my cousin, hung loose on my slender frame, making me look even smaller than I was. I fixed my eyes on the packed earth beneath my bare feet, counting each step to steady my breathing. 17 summers, Elder Margaret announced to the assembly. Daughter of Sarah and the late Thomas Bennett. The mention of my father sent a pang through my chest. He had died protecting the pack's southern borders when I was 12, torn apart by rogues. Sometimes I wondered if he would have been disappointed by what I had become, or rather what I had failed to become. Bloodline status? Alpha Nathaniel's deep voice resonated from the elevated stone seat where he presided over the ceremony. My breath caught. This was the part I had dreaded most. Elder Margaret's pause lasted a heartbeat too long. "Uncertain," she finally replied, the word falling like a stone into silence. The whispers started immediately, rustling through the crowd like wind through autumn leaves. I didn't need to hear them clearly to know what they said. Half-blood. Weak. Unworthy. I risked a glance up at Alpha Nathaniel, immediately wishing I hadn't. At 35, he was in his prime, powerful in a way that made even the strongest males lower their eyes. His face might have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and unyielding planes, shadowed by a neatly trimmed dark beard. But it was his eyes that stole my breath, amber gold and luminous in the firelight, cold and assessing as they raked over me. I had never stood this close to him before. Few had. Alpha Nathaniel had led our pack for 7 years with ruthless efficiency, transforming us from a struggling community into one of the most powerful packs in the region. He ruled through respect born of fear. And in those 7 years, he had taken no mate, shown interest in no female. Something flashed across his face as our eyes met. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. before his expression hardened again. He leaned forward slightly, and I caught his scent, pine and earth, and something wild, something that made the dormant wolf inside me stir in recognition. "Continue," he commanded, and Elder Margaret nodded, gesturing for me to step back. Relief flooded through me as I retreated to the shadows, legs weak. I had survived the first test. Just barely. The ceremony continued as twilight deepened into true night. One by one, eligible females presented themselves, strong, confident she-wolves with impressive lineages and valuable skills. Warriors and healers, strategists and hunters, each met Alpha Nathaniel's gaze without flinching. Each stood proud in the knowledge of her worth. The ceremonial fire at the center of the clearing burned higher as midnight approached. The drums began, a slow, hypnotic beat that echoed the rhythm of my heart. The second phase of the ceremony was beginning, the dance that would determine which females would be considered as potential mates for the unmated males. For the strongest, there might be the slim chance of catching the alpha's interest, though everyone knew he had rejected every candidate for 7 years running. "Form the circle," Elder Margaret commanded. The eligible females moved forward, arranging themselves around the fire. I hesitated, uncertain. "All presented females," the elder clarified, her sharp eyes finding me in the shadows. "That includes you, Eliza Bennett." Reluctantly, I joined the circle, acutely aware of how I paled in comparison to the others. Their confidence, their strength, their grace. The drums quickened, and the dance began. It was ancient, this ritual, older than any written history of our pack. The movements came from somewhere deep in our collective memory, a primal language of submission and dominance, strength and vulnerability. The females danced first, displaying their power, their worthiness. Then the males would join, making their intentions known. I moved stiffly at first, self-conscious and awkward, before closing my eyes and surrendering to the rhythm. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I could pretend I was alone. Just me and the beat of the drums, the warmth of the fire, the cool night air against my skin. I let my grandmother's pendant guide me, remembering how she had once shown me these steps in the privacy of our small garden, laughing as I stumbled and tried again. The memory brought unexpected tears to my eyes. When I opened them, the world had changed. The other females had moved into the second phase of the dance, aggressive and competitive, but my body had followed a different path. The gentle, flowing movements of an Omega's dance, nearly forgotten by our pack. It was a dance of peace, not power, of harmony, not dominance. And Alpha Nathaniel was staring directly at me, his expression unreadable. The music faltered. Dancers stumbled. Conversations died mid-word. In 7 years, no one had seen Alpha Nathaniel show particular interest in any female. Yet his focus was unmistakable, his golden eyes tracking my every movement with an intensity that made my skin burn. "What is she doing?" someone whispered loudly. "That's the old dance," an elder replied. "The Omega's call." The circle had broken now, females backing away from me as though distance might protect them from whatever punishment my transgression would bring. Only the elders looked on with something other than shock or disdain. There was recognition in their eyes, and something that might have been fear. I should have stopped, should have apologized, withdrawn, hidden myself away, but some strange courage had taken hold of me. Or perhaps it was resignation. I had already revealed myself as different. What more did I have to lose? So I continued, letting the dance tell my truth. I was not a fighter, not a leader, but a healer of rifts, a bearer of peace, the last of a dying kind. The drums had fallen silent, but I danced to the rhythm of my heartbeat, to the pulse of moonlight on my skin, and when I finally stilled, chest heaving with exertion and emotion, the silence was absolute. Alpha Nathaniel rose from his stone seat, his massive frame unfolding like a shadow coming to life. The crowd parted before him like water as he descended from the dais and approached the circle. No one breathed, no one moved. "The female dances truth," he announced, his deep voice carrying to the farthest edges of the gathering. "Who speaks for her bloodline?" My mother stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "I do, Alpha." "This is the Omega dance," he said, not a question, but a statement. She nodded once, My daughter carries my mother's gift. We believed it had skipped her generation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I stood frozen, unable to move as Alpha Nathaniel circled me slowly, his gaze never leaving my face. Up close, he was even more intimidating, taller than any man I'd ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to block out the moonlight. Power radiated from him like heat from the fire. "An Omega," he said softly, the words meant for me alone. After all these years, I couldn't read his tone. Was it displeasure? Curiosity? Something else entirely? I kept my eyes lowered, focusing on the steady rise and fall of his chest, the hands that could shift into deadly claws in an instant. "Look at me," he commanded. I raised my chin slowly, meeting his gaze. This close, I could see flecks of deeper gold in his amber eyes, like fragments of sunlight. Something passed between us, a current of recognition, of understanding that defied explanation. My grandmother's pendant grew warm against my skin. "The final phase will commence," he announced, turning back to the gathering. "All eligible males, step forward." Confusion rippled through the assembly. This wasn't how the ceremony was supposed to proceed. The females were meant to dance with their chosen partners first, to indicate preference before the males made their selections. Alpha Nathaniel was changing the ritual, and no one dared question why. As the males formed their own circle, Alpha Nathaniel returned to his seat, but his eyes never left me. The weight of his attention was both terrifying and exhilarating. No one had ever really seen me before. No one had ever looked at me as though I mattered. The night stretched on, a blur of movement and music, of ritualized courtship and subtle negotiations. I danced mechanically with those males brave enough to approach me after the alpha's unusual interest, but none held my attention. My awareness kept returning to the stone dais, to the golden eyes that followed my every move. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, Elder Margaret called for the final presentations, the formal declaration of intentions. This was when matches would be announced, when futures would be decided. I stood at the edge of the gathering, expecting nothing, wanting nothing except perhaps the ability to disappear. "Alpha Nathaniel will now declare his intentions," Elder Margaret announced, and a hush fell over the crowd. He stood, powerful and imposing in the moonlight, and every eye turned to him, every eye except mine. I kept my gaze fixed on the ground, certain that whatever he said would have nothing to do with me. "I claim the right of private audience," he stated, his voice brooking no argument. Shocked whispers erupted immediately. The right of private audience was rarely invoked, an ancient privilege that allowed an alpha to speak privately with a potential mate before making a public claim. It was both an honor and a warning. The female chosen would have no protection from the pack during that time, no witnesses to whatever transpired. "Name the female," Elder Margaret prompted, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Alpha Nathaniel's eyes found me unerringly in the crowd. "Eliza Bennett." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. This couldn't be happening. Not to me. Not with him. "Approach, Eliza," Elder Margaret instructed, her voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. On legs that threatened to buckle with each step, I made my way forward once more. The crowd's reactions ranged from shock to outrage to calculated reassessment. Ryan and his friends had fallen silent, their earlier mockery replaced by disbelief. As I reached the dais, Alpha Nathaniel extended his hand to me, a gesture both command and invitation. His palm was calloused, his fingers strong as they closed around mine. The contact sent a jolt through my system, awakening something that had lain dormant inside me for too long. "The Alpha and his chosen will retire to the sacred grove," Elder Margaret announced. "The ceremony will conclude upon their return." And just like that, I was led away from the only world I had ever known, into a future I could never have imagined, my fate now tied to the most dangerous wolf in our territory. The last thing I saw as we left the ceremonial grounds was my mother's face, a mixture of terror and fragile hope that mirrored the chaos in my own heart. The sacred grove stood apart from the main pack grounds, a half-mile journey through dense forest that felt like crossing into another world. Alpha Nathaniel moved with silent grace despite his size, navigating the moonlit path without hesitation while I stumbled over roots and stones behind him. He still held my hand, his grip firm but not painful, as though he feared I might bolt like frightened prey if he released me. Perhaps I would have. The night air had grown cooler, raising goosebumps along my bare arms. Or perhaps it was fear causing me to tremble. Fear of this man, this alpha, whose inscrutable gaze had singled me out for reasons I couldn't fathom. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Was this some elaborate form of punishment for my presumption? A test? A cruel joke? We hadn't exchanged a single word since leaving the ceremonial grounds. The silence stretched between us, taut as a bowstring. "You're cold," he said suddenly, his deep voice startling in the quiet forest. Before I could respond, he shrugged out of the ceremonial leather vest he wore, revealing a black t-shirt that clung to the muscled contours of his chest and shoulders. He draped the vest around me, the garment engulfing my smaller frame. It carried his scent, that intoxicating blend of pine and earth and untamed power, and warmth from his body that seemed to seep directly into my skin. "Thank you," I whispered, the words barely audible even to my own ears. He nodded once, his expression unreadable in the dappled moonlight, then continued forward. I clutched the edges of his vest around me like armor, though whether I was protecting myself from the night chill or from him, I couldn't say. The sacred grove appeared suddenly before us, a perfect circle of ancient oak trees surrounding a small clearing. At its center stood a stone altar, smooth and flat, with a small fire burning in a brazier beside it. The space felt charged with energy, with memories of rituals performed here since time immemorial. Alpha Nathaniel released my hand as we entered the clearing, moving to stand by the fire. The flames cast shifting patterns of light and shadow across his face, emphasizing the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the strong line of his jaw. He looked like something carved from darkness itself, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. "Do you know why we're here, Eliza?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I swallowed hard. The right of private audience. "And do you know what that means?" "It means..." My voice faltered. "It means you're considering me as a potential mate." Something flickered in his golden eyes. Amusement, perhaps. "Is that what you believe? Why else would we be here?" I countered, surprising myself with my boldness. "Indeed." He gestured to a flat stone at the edge of the clearing. "Sit, please." The addition of please seemed so incongruous coming from him that I obeyed without thinking, perching on the stone with my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. He remained standing, towering over me like a sentinel. "You're afraid of me?" he observed. It wasn't a question, so I didn't answer. The truth hung in the air between us, obvious and unavoidable. "Everyone is afraid of me," he continued, as though speaking to himself. "It's necessary. Fear maintains order." "Is that why you brought me here?" I asked quietly. "To remind me to fear you." His laugh was unexpected, a low, rough sound as though rarely used. "If that were my intention, there are more efficient ways to accomplish it." He turned to face me fully. "No, Eliza Bennett, I brought you here because you are the first interesting thing to happen in my territory in 7 years." I blinked, unsure how to respond to such a statement. "Because of the dance," I said finally. "Because of what the dance revealed." He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the small clearing. "An omega. Do you understand what that means?" I touched my grandmother's pendant reflexively. My grandmother tried to explain before she died. She said omegas are balancers, peacekeepers. They are far more than that. He crouched before me, bringing his face level with mine. This close, I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar that bisected his right eyebrow. Omegas are the heart of the pack. They sense emotions, absorb pain, diffuse conflict. They are rare, growing rarer with each generation, and infinitely precious. The way he said precious sent a shiver down my spine, not with desire or affection, but with the cold calculation of a man assessing a valuable asset. "I'm not like my grandmother," I said, needing him to understand. "I can barely shift. I have no special abilities, whatever you think I am." "I know exactly what you are," he interrupted. "Your body betrays you. Your scent, your movements, the way the pack responds to your presence without even realizing it. You've been suppressing your nature, hiding it perhaps even from yourself. But it emerged tonight in the dance. My heart pounded against my ribs. Could he be right? Had I been denying an essential part of myself all these years? If what you say is true, I said carefully, why has no one noticed before? Because no one was looking. His gaze was penetrating, as though he could see through flesh to the secrets beneath. Omegas learn to hide, to blend in. It's a survival mechanism in a world that often mistakes gentleness for weakness. But I've been searching, Eliza. For 7 years I've been waiting. Waiting for what? For you. The words fell between us like stones into still water, creating ripples I couldn't begin to measure. The pack needs an Omega. I need an Omega. Understanding dawned slowly, bringing with it a cold weight of dread. As your mate. He straightened to his full height again, moving away to circle the small fire. As my Luna, yes. Luna. The title given to an alpha's mate, his female counterpart, the mother of his children, and second in command of the pack, the position every female at the ceremony had coveted, except me. Why? The question burst from me before I could consider its wisdom. Why would you want me? I'm nothing like the others. I'm not strong or brave or... You think I need another alpha female? He cut in, his voice hardening. Another challenger? Another warrior? He shook his head. I have those in abundance. What this pack lacks is balance, compassion, healing. But our numbers have grown. Our territory has expanded. We are strong but divided. Factions form. Discontent simmers beneath the surface. For the first time, I glimpsed something like weariness in the set of his shoulders. An alpha rules through strength, Eliza. But strength alone creates only fear, not loyalty, not love. Love. The word seemed alien on his lips, at odds with everything I knew about this man who ruled through intimidation and cold authority. You don't know me, I said, finding courage in desperation. You can't possibly want me as your mate based on a dance, on a theory about what I might be. I know enough. He approached again, and this time he knelt before me, taking my smaller hands in his. The contact sent a jolt of awareness through me. His skin so much warmer than mine, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands capable of such violence. I've watched you, Eliza Bennett, more than you realize. I've seen how you slip food to the elderly wolves who can no longer hunt, how you mind the pups when their parents are busy with pack duties, how you step between quarreling packmates and somehow leave both sides feeling heard. Heat rushed to my cheeks. I hadn't thought anyone noticed those small gestures. Certainly not the alpha, who seemed so far removed from daily pack life. You think yourself weak, he continued, because you measure strength only in claws and teeth. But there are other kinds of power, Eliza. Quieter kinds, no less real. Something in his words resonated with a part of me long denied, a truth I'd buried beneath years of trying to be something I wasn't. Still, fear kept its grip on my heart. What if I refuse? I whispered. His expression darkened momentarily before settling into careful neutrality. The choice is yours. I won't force you. That is not our way. But know that refusing means remaining unmated, as no male in this pack would dare claim what the alpha has expressed interest in. The implication was clear. Refuse him, and I would be alone forever. Unclaimed, unprotected, in a world where pack meant everything. It was a devastating prospect. I need time, I said, surprised by my own temerity. This is overwhelming. Time, he repeated, as though the concept was foreign to him. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. 3 days. After that, I must announce my intentions to the pack one way or another. 3 days to decide my entire future. It seemed both an eternity and no time at all. He released my hands and rose to his feet in a fluid motion. There's something else you should know, Eliza, he said, turning away to gaze into the small fire. Something about me, about why this decision carries particular weight. I waited, watching the flames cast his profile in gold. I am the last of my bloodline, he said quietly, the last purebred alpha from the Northern Territories. When I die without an heir, my lineage dies with me, and with it, certain abilities that have protected our kind for generations. The admission seemed to cost him something. A crack in the impenetrable facade he presented to the world. I found myself rising, moving toward him without conscious decision. "What abilities?" I asked. His eyes met mine over the flames. "The ability to sense threats before they materialize, to know a lie from truth, to command absolute obedience from those of lesser blood." He paused. "To heal from wounds that would kill any other wolf. Powers I'd heard whispered about, but never confirmed. Powers that explained how he had risen to alpha so young, how he had expanded our territory against impossible odds. Any female could give you heirs," I pointed out. "Any female could bear children," he corrected. "But only an Omega's offspring would inherit both my strengths and their mother's gifts. A perfect balance, the next evolution of our kind." The clinical way he discussed our potential children sent a chill through me. This wasn't about attraction or affection. It was about bloodlines, about power, about the future of the pack. I was a means to an end. "I'll escort you back now," he said abruptly. "It's late, and you need rest." The sudden shift left me disoriented. I had 1,000 more questions, 1,000 protests, but he was already moving toward the path, clearly expecting me to follow. I hurried after him, nearly tripping over the hem of my dress in my haste. The journey back seemed shorter, the silence between us now charged with unspoken complexities. As we neared the edge of the pack grounds, I realized we would soon be visible to any wolves still awake. An anxiety knotted in my stomach. "What do I tell them?" I asked. "The pack, my mother, what do I say happened?" Alpha Nathaniel paused, considering. "The truth. That I invoked the right of private audience, that we discussed a potential union, and that you requested time to consider. They'll never believe you gave me a choice," I said before I could stop myself. Something that might have been hurt flashed across his face before it was gone, replaced by his usual impassive mask. "Then perhaps you don't know them as well as you think, Eliza Bennett." We walked the rest of the way in silence. As the lights of the main lodge came into view, he stopped again. "Keep this," he said, gesturing to his vest still draped around my shoulders. "It marks you as under my protection until your decision is made." The implications of that protection, and what it would mean to refuse it, hung heavy in the air between us. "Thank you, Alpha," I said formally. "Nathaniel," he corrected, his voice softening imperceptibly. "When we're alone, call me Nathaniel." The unexpected intimacy of the request caught me off guard. Before I could respond, he reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek in the lightest of touches. The contact was brief, almost hesitant, but it sent warmth spiraling through me, awakening sensations I'd never experienced before. 3 days, Eliza," he reminded me, then turned and walked away, his powerful form soon swallowed by darkness. I stood frozen, my hand rising to touch the spot where his fingers had been, my body humming with awareness I didn't understand. Only when I was certain he was gone did I let out the breath I'd been holding, my legs nearly giving way beneath me. What had just happened? How had one dance, one night, completely upended everything I thought I knew about my place in the world? With trembling fingers, I clutched my grandmother's pendant, wishing desperately for her guidance. "What do I do?" I whispered to the empty night. The pendant remained cool and silent against my skin, offering no answers to the impossible choice that lay before me. Dawn found me wide awake, curled in the window seat of my small bedroom, as first light painted the forest in shades of gold and amber. I hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, my mind replaying every moment of the previous night in an endless loop. The dance, the Alpha's golden eyes fixed on me, the sacred grove, his impossible proposition. Alpha Nathaniel's vest lay folded beside me, its presence both comfort and burden. I'd spent hours alternating between burying my face in its leathery warmth to inhale his scent and staring at it as though it might suddenly speak and tell me what to do. 3 days to decide whether to become Luna to the most feared Alpha in the region, to bind myself forever to a man I barely knew, who saw me not as a woman to love, but as a genetic complement to his bloodline. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Eliza? My mother's voice, tentative and worried. Are you awake? Come in, I called, not moving from my perch. She entered cautiously, her eyes immediately finding the vest beside me. Her face, already pale from a sleepless night, seemed to lose what little color remained. Then it's true, she whispered, sinking onto the edge of my bed. He's chosen you. News traveled fast in a wolf pack, faster still when it concerned the alpha. He's considering me, I corrected, wrapping my arms around my knees. I have 3 days to decide. Decide? She looked genuinely shocked. He's giving you a choice? Does that surprise you? She smoothed her hands over her skirt, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. Alpha Nathaniel isn't known for his patience or compromise, she said carefully. When he wants something, he takes it. And now he wants me. The words tasted strange on my tongue, impossible to reconcile with the reality I'd known my whole life. Invisible Eliza, half-wolf Eliza, the girl no one wanted. He wants an omega, my mother corrected gently, echoing my own thoughts. The dance revealed what you are. What I've suspected since you were small, but couldn't bring myself to believe. Your grandmother was the last omega in 3 generations. We thought the bloodline had weakened too much to produce another. Did you know? I asked, a sudden suspicion taking hold. Is that why you insisted I attend the ceremony, even though we both knew no male would choose me? She wouldn't meet my eyes. I hoped, she admitted. Your grandmother told me before she died that the right alpha would recognize you for what you are, that the old bloodlines call to each other across time and distance. I didn't believe her then. But last night, she shook her head, wonder mingling with fear in her expression. Betrayal stung sharp and unexpected. You offered me up like a sacrifice, I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. No. She moved to the window seat, taking my cold hands in hers. Never that. I wanted you to be seen, Eliza. To be valued for what makes you different, not despite it. I wanted... Her voice broke. I wanted you to have a place. The naked hope in her eyes made my anger crumble. She had only ever wanted my happiness, my security. In a world where lone wolves rarely survived, an unmated female was vulnerable in ways I preferred not to contemplate. What was he like? She asked after a moment. In the grove? How could I possibly describe the contradiction that was Alpha Nathaniel? The calculated logic behind his proposal juxtaposed against that brief, gentle touch, the cold assessment in his eyes and the unexpected warmth of his laugh. Different, I said finally. Not the monster everyone believes him to be, but not kind either. Practical, determined. Did he... She hesitated, cheeks flushing. Was he respectful? I understood her unspoken concern. The right of private audience had a darker history. Stories of alphas who took what they wanted regardless of consent. He didn't touch me, I assured her, omitting the feather-light caress at our parting that had kept me awake far more effectively than fear. He only talked. Relief softened her features. That's something, at least. Would it matter if he hadn't been? I asked, suddenly bitter. If becoming Luna is my only chance at a future in this pack, what choice do I really have? There are other packs, she said, though we both knew the suggestion was hollow. Wolves rarely survive the transition to a new pack, especially females without remarkable strength or skills to offer. We were bound to our birth packs by ties of blood and instinct, by the territory that had shaped us. What would you do? I asked, needing guidance even as I knew no one could make this decision for me. She was silent for a long moment, staring out at the forest beyond my window. Your father would say to follow your instincts, she said finally. The wolf knows, even when the human mind doubts. But that was precisely the problem. My wolf was the weakest part of me, a shadow of what it should have been. How could I trust instincts that had never fully developed? I need to be alone, I said, suddenly feeling suffocated by expectations I'd never asked for. I need to think, she nodded, rising reluctantly. At the door, she paused. Whatever you decide, Eliza, know that I'm proud of you. Your grandmother would be too. When she was gone, I changed quickly into worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, seeking comfort in familiar things. Alpha Nathaniel's vest I carefully hung in my closet, out of sight, but not out of mind. Then I slipped from the house, needing space, air, freedom from the weight of decisions too heavy for my shoulders. The pack grounds were unusually quiet for morning. Those few wolves who were outside fell silent as I passed, their stares burning into my back. News of the Alpha's interest had transformed me overnight from invisible to infamous. I quickened my pace, heading for the one place I'd always found peace, the small stream that marked the eastern boundary of our territory, where willows trailed their branches in clear water and wildflowers grew in abundance. My secret place, or so I'd thought. Well, if it isn't the Alpha's new pet. Ryan's voice froze me mid-step. He lounged against a tree just ahead, his posture deceptively casual, his eyes hard with malice. Where Ryan went, his friends followed. And sure enough, Mark and Jason emerged from the trees to flank him, their expressions equally hostile. "I'm not his pet," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Ryan pushed away from the tree, stalking toward me with the predatory grace all shifters possessed, even the cruel ones. At 20, he was already one of the pack's strongest fighters, with ambitions that outstripped his actual standing. He'd made no secret of his disdain for me over the years, for what he called my diluted blood. No? His lip curled. Then what are you, Eliza? His charity case? His little Omega experiment? The fact that he knew about my nature, something I myself had only just discovered, showed how quickly information traveled. "Leave me alone, Ryan," I said, trying to step around him. He moved to block my path, too close now, his scent aggressive and challenging. Everyone's talking about it. How the mighty Alpha Nathaniel chose the weakest female at the ceremony. It doesn't make sense. Unless what? I shouldn't have engaged, shouldn't have shown interest, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. Ryan's smile was ugly, unless he's using you. A convenient body to warm his bed while he looks for a real mate. A temporary distraction. The crude suggestion hit its mark, voicing my own deepest fear, that whatever Alpha Nathaniel wanted from me, it wasn't truly me he wanted at all. "Back off, Ryan," a new voice commanded, deep and unmistakably authoritative. All four of us turned to find Adam Hayes watching from a few yards away, his powerful arms crossed over his chest. As the pack's second, he was Alpha Nathaniel's right hand, his enforcer, the one who carried out the Alpha's will when Nathaniel himself was occupied elsewhere. At 30, he was only a few years younger than the Alpha, with a reputation for ruthless efficiency tempered by unexpected fairness. Ryan immediately took a step back, though resentment flashed across his face. "We were just talking," he said, insolence barely masked by a veneer of respect. "Didn't look like talking to me." Adam's dark eyes narrowed. "The Alpha has declared Eliza under his protection. Or did you miss that announcement?" "No, sir," Ryan muttered, casting a hateful glance my way. "Then I suggest you and your friends find somewhere else to be, now." The dismissal was unmistakable. With barely concealed fury, Ryan gestured to his friends, and the three of them slunk away, though not before Ryan whispered, "This isn't over," as he passed me. When they were gone, I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful despite my wariness of any wolf so close to Alpha Nathaniel. Adam's stern expression softened slightly. "Are you all right?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. In truth, Ryan's words had shaken me more than I wanted to admit, voicing doubts that had plagued me through the sleepless night. "Walk with me," Adam said. And though it was phrased as a request, the underlying command was clear. We fell into step together, following the path that led deeper into the forest, rather than toward my intended destination. I cast a longing glance back toward the stream, but didn't protest. One didn't refuse the pack's second. "The Alpha asked me to check on you," Adam said after we'd walked in silence for several minutes. Of course he had. Alpha Nathaniel wouldn't dirty his hands with a bully like Ryan, but he would ensure his investment remained secure. "I'm fine," I said stiffly. Adam's sidelong glance was skeptical. "Ryan's an ass," he said bluntly, "but he's not entirely wrong." My steps faltered. "What?" "This is unusual," Adam clarified, his voice carefully neutral. "In the 7 years I've served as second, I've never seen the alpha express interest in any female, let alone— He stopped abruptly. Let alone someone like me, I finished for him. A bitter taste in my mouth. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Someone so young, he amended. Someone so different from him. I know what I am, I said quietly, and what I'm not. Adam stopped walking, turning to face me fully. For the first time, I noticed the fine lines etched around his eyes, the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair at the temples, signs of the toll his position took. Do you? He asked, studying me with an intensity that reminded me uncomfortably of Nathaniel. Because I'm not sure anyone does, Eliza. Not completely. What does that mean? Instead of answering directly, he asked, Did he tell you why he's interested in you? He says the pack needs an Omega, I replied carefully, that his bloodline and mine would create balance. Adam nodded slowly. That sounds like him, practical to a fault. Is he always like that? The question slipped out unbidden, fueled by a curiosity I couldn't quite suppress. Cold? Calculating? Something like amusement flickered in Adam's eyes. Nathaniel is complicated. More than most realize. He resumed walking, forcing me to keep pace. He wasn't always as you see him now. Before he became Alpha, before the wars with the Southern Packs, he was different. Different how? Happier, Adam said simply. More prone to laughter, quick to forgive. A shadow crossed his face. Leadership changes a wolf, Eliza. Especially when that leadership is won through blood and sacrifice. I shivered despite the morning warmth. Everyone knew how Nathaniel had become Alpha, challenging the previous leader after that Alpha's poor decisions had nearly destroyed the pack. The fight had been brutal, legendary. Nathaniel had nearly died. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you have a choice to make, Adam replied. And choices based on fear or ignorance rarely lead to happiness. We had reached a small clearing I didn't recognize, far from the usual pack paths. At its center stood a massive oak, ancient and gnarled, its lowest branches nearly touching the ground. Do you know what this is? Adam asked, gesturing to the tree. I shook my head. The mother tree. The first alphas of our pack were joined here centuries ago. He touched the rough bark with something like reverence. Every mating ceremony used to be held here, before we grew too numerous and built the ceremonial grounds. I approached slowly, drawn by something I couldn't name. As my fingers brushed the bark, warmth seemed to flow from the wood into my skin, a sense of recognition, of belonging. She responds to you, Adam observed quietly. Another sign. I snatched my hand back. I don't want signs, I said, frustration bubbling up. I don't want prophecies or bloodlines or destinies. I just want— I trailed off, unable to articulate what exactly I did want. A choice that feels like yours. Adam finished for me, understanding in his eyes. I know. But sometimes, Eliza, what feels like fate is simply our deepest nature recognizing its path home. The remaining 2 days passed in a blur of whispers and stares, of sleepless nights and restless days. I avoided the pack as much as possible, spending hours by my stream, where the gentle sound of water over stones drowned out the chaos in my mind. Sometimes I sat with my mother, who filled the silence with stories of my grandmother, how she had calmed raging wolves with just her presence, how she had healed rifts between families that had festered for generations, how she had known the locations of lost pups before searches even began. Your gift may manifest differently, she told me, weaving wildflowers into a crown as we sat in our small garden. Each Omega is unique, shaped by their time and the needs of their pack. What if I have no gift? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if I'm just ordinary? She placed the flower crown on my pale blonde hair, her touch gentle. You've never been ordinary, Eliza. You've simply been waiting for the right moment to bloom. On the final night, I found myself once again at my window, watching the moon rise over the forest. Not quite full anymore, waning just as my time for decision waned. Alpha Nathaniel's vest lay across my lap, my fingers tracing the intricate patterns tooled into the leather. In 3 days, I had not seen him once, though I felt his presence everywhere. in the protective glances of Adam and the other senior wolves, in the deferential treatment from pack members who had previously ignored me, in the weight of expectation that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. A soft tap at my window startled me from my thoughts. I looked up to find golden eyes staring back at me from the darkness, and my heart leapt into my throat. Alpha Nathaniel stood on the small patch of grass beneath my second-story window, moonlight silvering his dark hair. He gestured for me to open the window, his expression unreadable. With trembling fingers, I unlatched it, pushing the glass outward. "Alpha," I whispered, acutely aware of my mother sleeping down the hall. "Nathaniel," he corrected, his voice a low rumble. "May I come up?" It was such an unexpected request that I could only nod, watching in amazement as he scaled the side of the house with effortless grace, using the ancient trellis as though it were a purpose-built ladder rather than a fragile support for climbing roses. In seconds, he was perched on my windowsill, his broad shoulders filling the frame. "You shouldn't be here," I said, backing away to give him space to enter. "Probably not," he agreed, swinging his legs inside with surprising agility for a man his size. "But tomorrow you give me your answer, and I realize something was missing from your considerations." He straightened to his full height, and my bedroom, never large, suddenly seemed impossibly small. He was dressed simply in jeans and a black Henley, yet somehow appeared no less intimidating than when in his ceremonial attire. "What was missing?" I asked, clutching his vest like a shield. "This," he said, and closed the distance between us in 2 steps. Before I could react, his hands cradled my face and his lips found mine in a kiss that stole my breath and scattered my thoughts like leaves in a storm. His touch was shockingly gentle, at odds with the power I knew he possessed, the violence those hands were capable of. He tasted of wild things, of forest nights and mountain storms, of freedom and danger intertwined. My wolf, that dormant, sluggish part of me, suddenly surged forward, responding to his touch with a hunger that frightened and exhilarated me in equal measure. My hands moved of their own accord, releasing the vest to clutch at his shoulders, anchoring myself as the world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. When he finally pulled away, I was trembling, my breath coming in short gasps. His eyes had darkened, the gold now burnished amber, pupils dilated with an emotion I couldn't name. "That," he said softly, "is also part of what being my Luna would mean." I stared up at him, speechless, my lips still tingling from his kiss, my body humming with sensations I'd never experienced before. "I thought you should know," he continued, stepping back to give me space, "that while bloodlines and pack politics are factors in my interest, they are not the only factors. You're attracted to me," I said, the realization dawning slowly. A hint of that rare smile touched his lips. "Is that so difficult to believe?" "Yes," I answered honestly. "No one has ever. I'm not—" I gestured helplessly at myself, at the plain girl reflected in my small mirror, the girl who had spent her life trying to be invisible. "You don't see yourself clearly, Eliza Bennett." His voice had roughened. "Perhaps you never have." I touched my lips, still feeling the imprint of his kiss. "This doesn't change anything," I said, trying to cling to rational thought when my body wanted nothing more than to move back into his arms. "A physical attraction doesn't mean we're compatible. Doesn't mean I could be what the pack needs, what you need." "No," he agreed, surprising me. "It doesn't. But it is information you should have before you decide." He moved toward the window again. "I've taken enough of your night. Tomorrow at moonrise, I'll expect your answer at the ceremonial grounds." Just like that, he was leaving, as abruptly as he had arrived. Something like panic fluttered in my chest. "Wait," I called, too loudly. We both froze, listening for any sound from my mother's room, but the house remained silent. "Please," I added more quietly, "I need to know something." He paused at the window, one leg already over the sill. "Ask." "If I say no," I began, forcing myself to meet his gaze, "what happens to me? To my mother?" His expression softened fractionally. "Nothing happens, Eliza. You remain under my protection as a valued member of the pack, your mother as well. And if other males wish to court me, A muscle ticked in his jaw. That would be your prerogative to accept or decline. But would they? I pressed. After you've shown interest, would any male dare approach me? He was silent for a long moment. Eventually, he said finally, when enough time had passed to make it clear I had no lingering claim. How long? A year. Perhaps 2. 2 years in which I would exist in limbo, neither claimed nor free, an object of speculation and gossip. 2 years in which I would carry the memory of his kiss, wondering what might have been. One last question, I said, gathering my courage. Why me? Truly. Beyond bloodlines and pack politics and physical attraction. Why Eliza Bennett, who has never belonged anywhere? He studied me with those penetrating eyes, as though seeing layers of me invisible to everyone else, perhaps even to myself, because you remind me of who I used to be, he said finally. Because when I look at you, I see someone who might help me remember the wolf I was before I became only alpha. With that disarming honesty, he was gone, disappearing into the night as silently as he had come, leaving me with more questions than answers, and the lingering warmth of his lips against mine. Sleep eluded me that night, my thoughts circling like birds looking for a place to land. By dawn, I was no closer to a decision than I had been 3 days ago. Only now my confusion was compounded by the memory of Nathaniel's kiss, the vulnerability in his final confession. As the day wore on, I moved through my routine mechanically, helping my mother with chores, organizing her healing herbs, avoiding the curious stares of packmates who crossed my path. The sun seemed to race across the sky, bringing moonrise, and my deadline, ever closer. Have you decided? My mother asked as evening approached, her voice carefully neutral. I shook my head, folding laundry with methodical precision. How do you know when a choice is right? I asked. How did you know with father? A sad smile touched her lips. I didn't. Not entirely. Love is always a leap of faith, Eliza. This isn't about love, I said quickly. Isn't it? She raised an eyebrow. Perhaps not yet, but all mating bonds have the potential for it, even ones that begin as alliances. I thought of Nathaniel's kiss, the hunger in his eyes, the surprising gentleness of his touch. Was that potential enough to build a life upon? As twilight deepened, I bathed and dressed with care in a simple blue dress that brought out the color of my eyes. I brushed my pale blonde hair until it shone, weaving a few small wildflowers into the strands as my mother had taught me. Finally, I fastened my grandmother's pendant around my neck and slipped into Nathaniel's vest, its weight both comforting and terrifying. You look beautiful, my mother said from the doorway, tears shimmering in her eyes. I haven't decided yet, I reminded her, though we both heard the lie in my voice. She embraced me tightly. Trust your instincts, she whispered. The wolf knows. The ceremonial grounds were fully lit when I arrived, torches casting dancing shadows across the gathered pack. Every member was present, from the youngest pups to the most ancient elders. All turned to watch my approach with expressions ranging from curiosity to envy to outright hostility. Alpha Nathaniel stood on the raised dais, powerful and imposing in formal attire, black pants, a crisp white shirt open at the throat, and a long leather coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Beside him stood Adam, watchful and serious as always. The crowd parted to let me pass, whispers following in my wake. I kept my gaze fixed on Nathaniel, drawing strength from the steady gold of his eyes as I approached the dais. He extended his hand to help me up the steps, and the brief contact sent a now familiar jolt through my system. Recognition, awareness, possibility. Eliza Bennett comes before the pack to respond to Alpha Nathaniel's interest, Elder Margaret announced, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. Speak your mind, child. All eyes were upon me, judging, assessing, wondering. In that moment, I understood what true courage meant, not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. I took a deep breath, my fingers finding my grandmother's pendant. I accept, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I accept the position of Luna and all that comes with it. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but I kept my eyes on Nathaniel. Something flashed across his face. Relief, triumph. Genuine happiness? Before he schooled his features back to their usual reserve. Alpha Nathaniel, Elder Margaret prompted. Do you confirm your intention to take Eliza Bennet as your mate and Luna? I do, he replied, his deep voice resonating through the grounds. Before the pack and the moon, I claim Eliza Bennet as mine to protect, to honor, and to stand beside as equal in all things. The traditional words washed over me, both promise and warning. Equal in all things. Would that ever truly be possible between us? Then it is decided, Elder Margaret declared. The mating ceremony will take place at the next full moon. Until then, Eliza Bennet will be recognized as Luna-elect, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. Nathaniel turned to me then, taking both my hands in his, though his expression remained solemn. I caught a glimmer of something softer in his eyes, something that eased the knot of anxiety in my chest. Thank you, he said. The words meant for me alone. Before I could respond, he leaned down and brushed his lips against mine. A chaste gesture compared to last night's kiss, but one that sent a clear message to the watching pack. I was his chosen, his future, his mate. The assembled wolves erupted in a traditional howl of acknowledgement, the sound rising to the star-filled sky. As it faded, Nathaniel's arm came around my waist, drawing me against his side in a protective gesture that felt both foreign and strangely right. Ready? He murmured. I wasn't. Not really. I doubted I ever would be. But as I looked out at the pack, my pack, I felt something shift inside me, some dormant part awakening at last. The weak, invisible girl I had been was already fading, making way for someone new, someone stronger, braver, more fully herself. Yes, I said, and leaned into his warmth, accepting whatever fate my choice had set in motion. For better or worse, I belonged now. Not just to Nathaniel, but to myself, to the wolf I was finally allowing myself to become. As we descended the dais together, the pack parting before us like water, I caught my mother's gaze in the crowd. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling, pride and hope shining in her eyes. Next to her stood Adam, his usual stern expression softened by what might have been approval. And in that moment, surrounded by witnesses to my transformation, I felt my grandmother's pendant grow warm against my skin, a blessing from beyond, a promise that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them not as the girl who had always hidden, but as the woman, the Luna, the Omega.